the cold earth pressed against her face, dirt filling her mouth and nose with each desperate breath. Above her, the sound of shovels scraping and men laughing grew fainter as they buried Clara Whitman alive in a shallow grave beside the creek that ran through her land. The cattle baron Marcus Thorne's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. His words were simple and cruel. She should have sold when she had the chance. Now her land would be his anyway, and she would be nothing but bones beneath the prairie grass. Clara's fingers clawed at the loose soil as consciousness returned. The men were gone now, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. They had beaten her until she stopped moving, thrown her into this hole, and covered her with just enough dirt to hide their crime. But they had made one mistake. They had not checked if she was truly dead. The will to survive burned through her broken body like wildfire. Her father had taught her that the land was unforgiving but honest. It would take everything from the weak but give everything to those strong enough to claim it. She would not die here, not like this. Inch by painful inch, she pushed through the dirt. Her ribs screamed in protest, likely broken from Thorne's boots. Blood ran from cuts on her face and arms. But she kept moving, kept fighting, until her hand broke through to the surface. The sun was rising, painting the sky orange and red. She pulled herself from that grave like something born from the earth itself, gasping and choking on the morning air. Her ranch house stood in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. The men who had tried to kill her were inside, already claiming what they thought was theirs. Clara had inherited this land from her father just 2 years ago when she was 23. It was not much to look at, just 200 acres of grass and rock, but it had the only reliable water source for 30 miles in any direction. That spring meant everything out here. Cattle needed water, families needed water, towns needed water. Marcus Thorne owned the biggest cattle operation in the territory, and he wanted that spring. He had offered to buy her out 3 times. Each time, she had refused. This was her home, her father's legacy, and she would not abandon it for any amount of money. The attack had come yesterday at sunset. 5 men rode up to her house while she was bringing in the horses. Thorne stayed on his mount while his men dragged her from the porch. They wanted her to sign over the deed. When she spit in Thorne's face instead, they started hitting her. She remembered the taste of blood, the sound of her own bones breaking, the moment when everything went dark. They must have thought she was dead. Why else would they leave her in such a shallow grave? Their arrogance would be their downfall. Clara dragged herself to a small cave hidden behind a cluster of rocks about a mile from the house. Her father had shown her this place years ago, a shelter he used during storms when he was out checking the herd. Inside, she found an old blanket and a tin of matches he had left there. She built a small fire and examined her injuries by its light. 3 ribs were definitely broken. Her left eye was swollen shut. Cuts covered her arms and legs. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. The cave had a small pool of water fed by an underground stream. Clara cleaned her wounds as best she could, biting down on a stick to keep from screaming. She knew which plants could help with pain and infection. Her mother, before she died of fever, had taught her about the healing properties of prairie sage and willow bark. Clara spent 2 days in that cave, treating her injuries and planning what came next. She could have gone to town for help, but the sheriff was in Thorne's pocket. The law would not help her. She would have to help herself. On the 3rd night, when her body had healed enough to move without crying out, Clara crept back toward her ranch. The moon was new, leaving the prairie in near total darkness. She could see lantern light in the windows of her house. The men were still there, using her home as their base while they brought in their cattle to her land. She counted 4 horses tied to the porch rail. 1 man sat on guard, but he was nodding off, a whiskey bottle at his feet. The others were inside, their loud voices and laughter carrying through the windows. Clara knew every board of that house, every creaking floorboard, every squeaking door hinge. Her father had built it with his own hands, and she had helped him when she was just a girl. She slipped around to the back, where a loose window in the storage room could be pushed open without making a sound. Inside, she moved like a shadow, avoiding the spots that would give her away. The men had brought their weapons with them, leaving rifles propped against walls and gun belts hanging from chairs. They felt safe here, confident that no one would challenge them. One by one, Clara gathered their guns. She took 6 rifles, 4 revolvers, and 3 boxes of ammunition. She wrapped them in a blanket from her own bed and carried them out the same window she had entered. But she was not done yet. The horses were the next part of her plan. These men had taken everything from her. Now she would take everything from them. She untied their horses and led them away into the darkness, using a handful of oats from the barn to keep them quiet and willing to follow. By the time the sun rose, Clara was 5 miles away with their weapons and their horses. She had found an abandoned line shack on the edge of her property, a place the men would not think to look. From there, she could watch them, study them, and wait for the right moment to strike back. The weapons were her power now. Without guns and without horses, these men were just bullies playing at being dangerous. She would show them what real danger looked like. The discovery of their missing weapons and horses threw the men into chaos. Clara watched from a distant ridge as they ran around the ranch, shouting and blaming each other. Thorne arrived later that morning, his face red with rage. He struck one of his own men, demanding to know how they could have been so careless. They searched the area but found nothing. Clara had covered her tracks well, using tricks her father had taught her about moving through the land without leaving signs. Word spread quickly to the nearby town of Millbrook. The story grew with each telling. Some said it was a rival gang that had robbed Thorne's men. Others whispered about strange things, about a woman's ghost seen walking the prairie at sunset. Clara helped these rumors along. She would ride close to town at dusk, just close enough to be seen but not identified, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. People began calling her the Ghost of Whitman Ranch, and the name struck fear into those who had wronged her. Clara's campaign against Thorne and his men began in earnest a week after she had taken their guns. She did not want to kill them. Death would be too easy, too quick. She wanted them to feel what she had felt in that grave, helpless, afraid, abandoned. Her first move was simple but effective. While the men slept, she fired a single shot that splintered the wood of the doorframe, inches from where Thorne's man Jake was standing guard. The shot came from nowhere, and by the time they grabbed their remaining weapons and ran outside, she was gone. The next day, she struck again. This time, she led away the new horses they had brought from town, leaving the men stranded on foot. She left the horses 10 miles away, tied to a tree where they would eventually be found, but not before the men had spent days searching. Without horses, they could not effectively patrol the land or bring supplies from town. They were trapped on the ranch, growing more paranoid with each passing hour. Clara targeted their supplies next. She would sneak close at night and shoot holes in their water barrels, forcing them to haul water from the spring by hand. She set fire to a wagon full of food they had brought from town, watching from a safe distance as they tried desperately to put out the flames. Each action was calculated to wear them down, to make them feel hunted and helpless. She wanted them to turn on each other, and soon enough, they did. By the second week, the men were at each other's throats. Jake blamed Tom for falling asleep on watch. Tom blamed Samuel for suggesting they stay at the ranch in the first place. Samuel wanted to abandon the whole operation and return to town. Only Thorne's iron will kept them from deserting entirely, but even he was beginning to crack. He had not slept properly in days, jumping at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. Clara saved her final move for when they were at their weakest. She had been watching them argue near the spring, the very water source they had tried to steal from her. Thorne was there with his 3 remaining men, trying to convince them to stay and fight. That was when she revealed herself, stepping out from behind the rocks with one of their own rifles aimed at them. She did not look like a ghost. She looked like what she was, a woman who had survived their worst and come back stronger. The men reached for weapons that were not there. Clara had made sure of that, stealing their last guns the night before while they slept. Thorne's face went from red to white as he recognized her. He had buried her himself, or so he thought. Yet here she stood, very much alive and holding all the power. She could have killed them all right then. Part of her wanted to, but that would have made her no better than them. Instead, Clara made them an offer. They would leave her land immediately and never return. They would tell everyone in town that the ranch belonged to her and her alone. In exchange, she would let them walk away with their lives. Jake, Tom, and Samuel agreed immediately, backing away from Thorne and heading for the road to town on foot. But Thorne stayed, his pride keeping him rooted in place, even as his men abandoned him. Clara stepped closer, the rifle never wavering. She told him to reach into his jacket pocket slowly. Inside was the deed to her land, the paper she had refused to sign. He had been carrying it, waiting for the chance to forge her signature, or find some other way to make it legal. She made him place it on the ground and step back. Then she made him empty his pockets of everything else. Money, ammunition, even his expensive pocket watch. These were small victories, but they mattered. The final humiliation came when she told him to walk back to town, just as his men had done. No horse, no weapon, no dignity left. Thorne looked like he might refuse, might make some desperate attempt to overpower her. But the barrel of the rifle and the cold determination in her eyes changed his mind. He turned and walked away, his expensive boots kicking up dust on the road. Clara watched until he was just a speck in the distance, then finally lowered the rifle. Over the following days, Clara returned the stolen horses to town, claiming she had found them wandering the prairie. She sold the weapons she had taken, using the money to hire hands to help run her ranch properly. And the story of what had happened spread far and wide. Some people called her a hero, others called her dangerous, but everyone agreed on one thing. Clara Whitman was not someone to cross. The sheriff came by eventually, Thorne's money no longer enough to keep him loyal after such a public humiliation. He asked Clara if she knew anything about the strange events at her ranch. She told him she had been recovering from injuries in town, staying with the doctor and his wife. The doctor, who had treated her wounds and heard her story, confirmed her alibi without hesitation. The sheriff left without pressing further. Even he knew better than to challenge someone who had faced death and won. Marcus Thorne never returned to the territory. Some said he went back east, his reputation destroyed. Others claimed he went south to Mexico, looking for easier targets. His cattle empire crumbled without him, divided up among smaller ranchers who had waited years for their chance. The spring on Clara's land remained hers, and she managed it fairly, allowing neighbors to water their herds in exchange for help during harvest and branding season. Clara stood on her porch now, watching another sunrise paint the sky. Her ribs had healed, though they still ached when storms were coming. The scars on her arms had faded to thin white lines. She wore her father's hat and her mother's ring, carrying both their memories with her. The land stretched out before her, harsh and beautiful, demanding and giving. This was her home, fought for and won, paid for in blood and determination. People still call her the ghost sometimes, especially when they saw her riding the ridge at sunset, checking her herd and watching over her domain. She did not mind the name. Let them think her supernatural, if it kept the peace. She knew the truth. She was not a ghost. She was something far more powerful. She was a survivor who had taken back what was hers, using her enemy's own weapons against them. The story of Clara Whitman became legend in those parts, told in saloons and around campfires for generations. It was a warning to those who would abuse their power, and a reminder that sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from someone left for dead who refuses to die. Sometimes it comes from a woman with dirt still under her fingernails and fire in her heart, holding the very guns that were meant to keep her down. What do you think about Clara's choice to let them live? Would you have done the same in her position? Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of frontier justice and the people who refuse to be victims in the unforgiving American West.